Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Let me start with wishing you well in these really troubling times and take as much care as you can of you, yourself, your family, your parents, your grandparents. We live in an unprecedented moment. I have to admit, I became pretty obsessed from early January with what I was seeing. And everything that I felt in worst case scenarios are now playing out, partly because our politicians have been in denial and deluded and have not dealt with the situation on time. And ultimately, it looks like to me, every health facility is going to be maxed out in the space of days, if not maximum weeks. And therefore, you really have to take care now. And please, I want to be on the other side talking to you a year from now. Let me start with some macro thoughts. I know I plugged gold and we had the most awful sell-off immediately thereafter, which is the nature of markets, and I was careless because I did not look back at 208. I just looked at the volume of money printing and saw wheelbarrows and thought to myself, the only safe haven is going to be gold, which is correct nevertheless, but we had this big sell-off. But I now think this might be the moment now when gold goes viral, and we're currently at 1505. And we based out, I think, at 1464, 1465. The Bank of England lowered rates to 0.1% and increased bond purchases. I can't keep up. Everyone is cutting rates now. They're just throwing everything that they can into the situation. And as Pepe Escobar said in his article in Asia Times, what's certain is that the whole global economy has been hit by an insidious, literally invisible circuit breaker. We're moving from a hyper-connected world to one of quarantine. And of course, you can work out who's in the firing line, airlines for starters. The world's economists and policymakers are flummoxed by the exponential and multiplicative nature of the COVID-19. Their thinking is linear, and they're meeting their match in a non-linear virus. The virus is not correlated to endogenous market dynamics, but is an exogenous uncertainty that remains unresolved, and therefore it is a black swan. As I said on the 24th of February, and it gives me no satisfaction because I said a rate cut or even four will just produce a dead cat bounce and then a dynamic move to the downside. Policymakers cannot vaccine the market with rate cuts because this is non-linear and exponential. And you've seen a whole bunch of rate cuts which have had no effect whatsoever, and they won't. Therefore, a V-shaped recovery is a fantasy, and we're not going to see one. We're going to see a depression this year in the global economy. Oil majors' market cap in dollars ex Aramco combined, they have shed $770 billion year to date. But interestingly, we had a very dynamic up move in the oil market yesterday. We're currently at $27.65. And technically, we can pronounce crude oil in a bull market, which is quite an interesting development given what's happened. Home thoughts: you can grasp nothing but crumbs of memory. Andre Villeneuve. Death Valley by Gary Horsfall, United States. A. Alomi, who writes about Islamic mythology and the jinn, asks, is it really social distancing if we are all surrounded by the jinn? Jinns are made of a smokeless and scorching fire. They are usually invisible to humans, but humans do appear clearly to jinn as they can possess them. Jinn have the power to travel large distances at extreme speeds and are thought to live in remote areas. So now you know. One particular miracle that sorcerers and holy men both sought was Tay al-Ad, which allowed a person to travel vast distances in a blink of an eye, or Tay al-Makan, by folding space. Coming from the Swahili coast as I do, jinns are very real. The viral moment has arrived was that article I wrote on the 24th of February. Seems an eternity ago. I've been reading Albert Camus' La Peste. And this applies to today, doesn't it? In this respect, our townsfolk were like everybody else, and my townsfolk are like my Twitter feed. Wrapped up in themselves, in other words, they were humanists. They disbelieved in pestilences. A pestilence isn't a thing made to man's measure. Therefore, we tell ourselves that a pestilence is a mere bogey of the mind, a bad dream that will pass away. But it doesn't always pass away, and from one bad dream to another, it is men who pass away, and the humanists first of all, because they have taken no precautions. For a long while, God gazed down on this town with eyes of compassion, but he grew weary of waiting. His eternal hope was too long deferred, and now he has turned his face away from us. And so, God's light withdrawn, we walk in darkness, in the thick darkness of the plague. And I went from there, sort of being visited with the plague, to I am Rana, the famous inscription, if there is a paradise on earth, in Diwan-e-Kas, the Red Fort. Last year, I must admit, I wrote a number of articles which now I'm looking back on. It was kind of prescient. I said in one, there is certainly a fin de siècle, even apocalyptic mood afoot. And then a shortage of coffins as providers struggle to keep up with demand, and funeral workers becoming infected with the virus are hampering preparations in Bergamo. This is frightening. In Bergamo, a province of 1.2 million people, this is the richest part of Italy, in the Lombardy region, where 1,640 of the total deaths in the country have taken place. 3,993 people had contracted the virus by Tuesday. The death toll across the province is unclear. They're not even counting the bodies. But CFB, the area's largest funeral director, has carried out almost 600 burials or cremations since March 1. In a normal month, we would do about 120. A generation has died in just over 2 weeks. We've never seen anything like this, and it just makes you cry. There are about 80 funeral companies across Bergamo, each receiving dozens of calls an hour. A shortage of coffins as providers struggle to keep up with demand, and funeral workers become infected with the virus, are also hampering preparations. A cemetery employee closes the gates behind a hearse at the monumental cemetery of Bergamo. That photograph is from Piero Cruciati. As I said, at the end of last year, it certainly feels like a decade of semiotic arousal when everything, it seemed, was a sign, a harbinger of some future radical disjuncture or cataclysmic upheaval. Italian army called in to carry away corpses. The city's crematorium is overwhelmed. Watch Sky News. They've got this report where the doctors are saying, we want you to watch this to understand what's coming. The crematorium of Bergamo, working at full capacity 24 hours a day, can cremate 25 dead. Coffins are now being taken to crematoriums in Modena, Acquiterme, Domo d'Ossola, Parma, Piacenza, and several other cities. The zeitgeist of a time is its defining spirit or its mood. Capturing the zeitgeist of the now is not an easy thing because we're living in a dizzyingly fluid moment. Paul Virilio, the end of the world, is a concept without a future. Political reflections. Over 18,000 new cases of COVID-19 were reported in a single day. This is a record high, far surpassing the epidemic peak in China. Exponential growth is unabated. Cases are multiplying by 10 every 14 days. Zorina Q. This hospital in Bergamo, Italy, wanted this footage published so the rest of the world knows what's coming. That's from Zorina Q as well. Over 900 new deaths were reported in a single day, a record high. Deaths are multiplying by 10 every 10 days. So I expect 50 deaths by the end of March. And this is undercounting the numbers. For comparison, the coronavirus has killed more people in the last 24 hours than SARS did since it emerged in 2002. Exponential, non-linear. 17,800 new confirmed cases, which is no surprise since the virus spread is accelerating and has now infected 160 countries. This is Remy GMI, who's also producing very interesting data. Total deaths caused by COVID-19 infection, 8,951. It's over 9,000. Sadly on track with our expectation of 10,000 by the end of the week. 23 countries now report more than 500 confirmed cases. And remember that data point we saw for each reported case, they were estimating there was 24 to 50. And this is what I've been talking about when I say viruses exhibit nonlinear and exponential characteristics and present nonlinearity and exponential risks. The curve tells us that it usually takes 8 days to go from 500 to 2,000 confirmed cases, and so we can expect significant growth in the next 8 days. Europe is on track to reach 100,000 cases by the weekend, and indeed the viral moment has arrived. California issues a statewide stay-at-home order, and I put in brackets, California is a precursor. Trump, thank you for all being here, and we continue our relentless effort to defeat the Chinese virus, he said. The number of cases in the US is now growing at a faster rate than both the European Big Five and South Korea at the same stage, here on a log chart, Remy GMI. The marketeer, Corona, China versus the others. And you know, I believe that the Chinese numbers are massively undercounted. Mathematically, their numbers as presented are not possible. And there's some reports coming out to that effect now, but I still don't understand what they've done with the bodies, unless I believe that Reddit article I mentioned to you where they were burning them. What are the odds of this virus situation leading to a military conflict between the US and China? That's mine for nothing. And I responded by saying considerably more than currently priced in. If you were an adversary and you knew how to game the timing, then the COVID-19 is indeed the most viral of missiles striking at the heart of the White House and relying on Trump to delay his response because of his ego and because of the election. Even Goebbels is turning in his grave with envy and rage as we speak, twittered Ndege from Munich. I said a few weeks ago it will be a Trump viruside. He is already behind the curve, and the curve is parabolic, exponential, and non-linear. And I said it's over. The virus may be the most dangerous adversary America has ever faced. It's like the US was invaded. Balagis. The normal defenses fail, it can't be bombed, bank accounts can't be frozen, it has unbreakable morale, no supply chain, lives off the land, infinite reinforcements, and is fully decentralized. And that's why I quoted William Burroughs and added my own. I said a non-linear and exponential virus represents the greatest risk to a control machine. His famous quote was, "Smash the control machine," and indeed, that's precisely what a virus can do. As you know, Z has been talking about white devils or foreign devils, Guaylo in Mandarin, Guaylo in Cantonese. According to Pepe Escobar, this was Z delivering a powerful statement in code. And therefore, I don't think war is such a tail risk as many in the markets might think. I want all Americans to understand we're at war with an invisible enemy, but that enemy is no match for the spirit and resolve of the American people, but certainly is a match for the spirit and resolve of the American president. Z's terminology is a major clue. He said on the record that this was war, and as a counterattack, a people's war had to be launched. Taiwan says the WHO failed to act on coronavirus transmission warning, failing to communicate at an early warning about transmission of the coronavirus between humans, slowing the global response to the pandemic. Health officials in Taipei said they alerted WHO at the end of December about the risk of human-to-human transmission of the new virus, but said its concerns were not passed on to other countries. The WHO's relationship with China has been criticized in the past, with some accusing the organization of overly praising Beijing's handling of the coronavirus outbreak, despite allegations local officials had initially covered it up. Taiwan said its doctors had heard from mainland colleagues that medical staff were getting ill, a sign of human-to-human transmission. While the IHR's internal website provides a platform for all countries to share information on the epidemic and their response, none of the information shared by our country's Centers for Disease Control is being put up there, said Taiwan's vice president. The WHO could not obtain first-hand information to study and judge whether there was human-to-human transmission of COVID-19. This led it to announce human-to-human transmission with a delay, and an opportunity to raise the alert both in China and the wider world was lost, said Mr. Chen. China's health ministry only confirmed human-to-human transmission on January 20, after the WHO said in mid-January there might be limited human-to-human transmission, but stepped back from this view on the same day. Chinese health officials also refused to include any reference to avoiding a second wave of coronavirus in the report, he said, so they compromised on a surge or resurgence. In fact, WHO tweeted on the 14th of January, preliminary investigations conducted by the Chinese authorities have found no clear evidence of human-to-human transmission of the novel coronavirus in Wuhan. And I wrote about this and I said, what is clear is that the CCP suppressed information until we reached a Groucho Marx moment. Who you going to believe, me or your own eyes? I said that on the 27th of January. What is thriving, however, is all that ridiculous red culture and the nauseating adulation that the system heaps on itself via shameless pro-party hacks who chirrup hosannas at every turn. Gary Kasparov, no country is better prepared. Pence sounds like a Soviet agriculture minister boasting of record grain harvests while people starve. The truth is whatever the dear leader says today. And I tweeted Gary and said it's very circular. February 22nd, I said, who is captured and millions of lives will have been trifled with. The game is up. 1st of March, talking about the origin of the coronavirus, which has been strangely suppressed in the media, I said there's always more to it. This is what history consists of. It's the sum total of things they aren't telling us. Don DeLillo. What are the odds that a SARS-like coronavirus with overlapping genetics from HIV mutated and crossed over into humans, Scott Burke 777, next door to a laboratory which had been enhancing coronavirus with HIV for over a decade? And conversely, what are the odds it leaked out of the laboratory? If they can get you asking the wrong questions, they don't have to worry about the answers. Thomas Pynchon. A paranoid is someone who knows a little of what's going on. William Burroughs. Very interesting research piece identifying and interrupting super spreading events, implications for control of severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus 2, COVID-19, CDC. There have been multiple reports of super spreading events. SSEs are not limited to emerging infectious diseases. In the early 20th century, Mary Mylon, Typhoid Mary, an asymptomatic typhoid carrier who worked as a cook, infected more than 50 persons. Little-known study of tuberculosis demonstrated that many patients, even those with smear-positive cavitary tuberculosis, were not highly infectious, but that 3 of 77 patients accounted for 73% of the infectious burden. During the 2003 SARS epidemic in Beijing, China, one hospitalized index patient was the source of 4 generations of transmissions to 76 patients, visitors, and healthcare workers. During Ebola, SSEs played a key role sustaining the epidemic. 3% of cases were estimated to be responsible for 61% of infections. The goal of a public health response is to drive the reproductive number to a value less than 1, something that might not be possible in some situations without better prevention, recognition, and response to SSEs. A meta-analysis estimated that the initial median RO for COVID-19 is 2.79. Although current estimates might be biased because of insufficient data. In Wuhan, aggressive implementation of non-pharmaceutical interventions in the community, including a cordon sanitaire of the city, suspension of public transport, school and most work, and cancellation of all public events, reduced the RO number from 3.86 to 0.32 over a 5-week period. All SARS superspreaders were symptomatic. SARS and MERS had relatively low rates of person-to-person transmission, but caused explosive outbreaks in healthcare settings. Rapid person-to-person transmission of COVID-19 appears likely to have occurred in healthcare settings, on a cruise ship, and in a church. In a study of 110 case patients from 11 clusters in Japan, all clusters were associated with closed environments, including fitness centers, shared eating environments, and hospitals. The odds for transmission from a primary case patient were 18.7 times higher than in open-air environments. Evidence of environmental contamination by SARS-CoV-2 through respiratory droplets and fecal shedding highlights the need for effective decontamination efforts and strict adherence to environmental hygiene. In Sierra Leone, one traditional funeral was associated with 28 laboratory-confirmed cases of Ebola. During the MERS outbreak in South Korea, doctor shopping, visiting multiple healthcare facilities after symptoms developed, was associated with SSEs. SSEs also occur in settings other than healthcare settings. The SARS outbreak in Hong Kong was characterized by 2 SSEs responsible for more than 400 infections. One guest at the Metropole Hotel was the index case for 4 national and international clusters. That's incredible, isn't it? So you have SSEs who are really super transmissive. A study modeling the impact of interventions in Wuhan found that although early identification and isolation reduced the number of infections somewhat, integrated implementation of NPIs decreased the number of cases rapidly and substantially and drove the reproductive number to less than 1. That's why when I was writing about Ebola in October 2014, I said it is about escape velocity. Viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics. Instagram may offer clues about the spread of the new coronavirus. Could the photo sharing service also be used to track the spread of a pandemic? Social media platform may seem an odd tool for studying the coronavirus outbreak. It is older people, after all, that's now being diluted, who are the most vulnerable to the virus. Most Instagram users are under 35, but young people can be powerful carriers of the illness because they often experience mild symptoms. Infected youngsters may not know they are ill. Now, I read this incredible article in Intelligenza, and if you're queasy, don't read it. I'll look away now. How the coronavirus could take over your body before you ever feel it. You call a friend and arrange to meet for lunch. It is unseasonably spring-like, so you choose a place with outdoor seating, which seems like it should be safer. As usual, you take all reasonable precautions. You use hand sanitizer, sit a good distance from other customers, and try to avoid touching your face. Though that last part is hard, a part of you suspects that this whole thing might be overblown. What you don't know is that about 10 days ago, your friend's father was a guest of his business partner at the university club, where he caught the novel coronavirus from the wife of a cryptocurrency speculator. 3 days after that, he coughed into his hand before opening the door of his apartment to welcome his son home. The saliva of COVID-19 patients can harbor 500 billion virus particles per teaspoon, and a cough aerosolizes it into a diffuse mist. As your friend walked through the door, he took a breath, and 32,456 virus particles settled onto the lining of his mouth and throat. Viruses have been multiplying inside his body ever since, and as he talks, the passage of his breath over the moist lining of his upper throat creates tiny droplets of virus-laden mucus that waft invisibly into the air over your table. Some settle on the yet uneaten food on your plate, some drift onto your fingers, others are drawn into your nasal sinus or settle into your throat. By the time you extend your hand to shake goodbye, your body is carrying 43,654 virus particles. By the time you're done shaking hands, that number is up to 312,405. The outer membrane of the virus consists of an oily layer embedded with jagged protein molecules called spike proteins. These stick out like the protrusions on a knobbly ball chew toy. In the middle of the virus particle is a coiled strand of RNA, the virus's genetic material, the payload. It's like Santa's workshop, where the elves, dutifully hammering out the toys on Santa's instructions, are complexes of RNA and protein called ribosomes. These collect in internal bubbles called vesicles that move to the surface, burst open, and release new virus particles into your body by the tens and hundreds of thousands. Assuming the virus behaves like its relative SARS, each generation of infection takes about a day and can multiply the virus 1,000,000-fold. You call up an ex and she agrees to meet you for a walk along the river. You're hoping that the end of the world's zeitgeist might kindle some afternoon recklessness, but the face mask she wears kills the vibe. What she doesn't know is that an hour before you went to the bathroom and neglected to wash your hands afterward. The invisible fecal smear you leave on the arm of her jacket contains 893,405 virus particles. 47 seconds after she gets home, she'll hang up her coat and then scratch an itch at the base of her nose just before she washes her hands. In that moment, 9,404 viral particles will transfer to her face. In 5 days, an ambulance will take her to Mount Sinai. Fighting for breath, you order an Uber and head to the nearest emergency room. You leave 376,345,090 virus particles smeared on various surfaces of the car, and another 323,443,865,000 floating in aerosols in the air. Within a day of your arrival, your condition deteriorates. You throw up for several days and start to hallucinate. Your heart rate slows to 50 beats a minute. When a patient in the next room dies, doctors take the ventilator he was using and put you on it. You're crashing. Your immune system has flung itself into a cytokine storm, an overdrive of such intensity that it is no longer fighting just the viral infection, but the body's own cells as well. White blood cells storm your lungs, destroying tissue. Fluid fills the tiny alveolar sacs that normally let the blood absorb oxygen. Effectively, you're drowning, even with the ventilator pumping oxygen-enriched air into your lungs. That's not the worst of it. The intensity of the immune response is such that under its onslaught, organs throughout the body are shutting down, a process known as multiple organ dysfunction syndrome, or MODS. You're fluttering on the edge between life and death. Now that you've slipped into MODS, your odds are 50-50 or worse, owing to the fact that the pandemic has stretched the hospital's resources past the breaking point. Your outlook is even bleaker. In the isolation ward, your EKG goes on a steady tone. The doctors take away the ventilator and give it to a patient who arrived this morning. In the official records of the COVID-19 pandemic, you'll be recorded as victim number 592. I skipped a lot of bits. Let's go to the international markets. Currency markets: euro dollar 107.79, dollar index 101.858, Japanese yen 109.73, Swiss franc 0.9803, the pound 118.04. The dollar's selling off in the last 24 hours. The Australian dollar 0.5939, India rupee 74.8945, South Korean won 1244.55, Brazilian real 509.62, Egyptian pound 15.75, South African rand 17.29. Dollar index has had a humongous rally, but seems to now be running out of steam. Euro dollar, we're currently at 107.79. Chart of the day: the publicly available data from restaurant booking app OpenTable shows dining reservations in the US down 84% as of March 17. That's year-on-year change. That's the end of the hyper-connected world as we know it. Commodity markets: copper is making a comeback after dipping below $2 per pound in overnight trading. Worries about a deep recession and demand destruction has seen the bellwether metal drop 18% this month. $100 billion of debt from emerging market nations is now distressed. 15 nations with more than $100 billion of Eurobonds outstanding now have average spreads of at least 1,000 basis points over US Treasuries, which many investors consider to be the threshold for debt to be classed as distressed. And that doesn't even include Lebanon, which defaulted this month, and Argentina, which has begun restructuring talks with bondholders. Ecuador and Zambia are the countries investors appear most concerned about. The former, whose Eurobonds due in March 2022 yield more than 70%, was hit by popular protests last year. Zambia has been battered by weakening copper prices and drought, which has led to power cuts caused by low water levels at the hydroelectric dams. Many investors have said it could default without an IMF program, though the government has shown little willingness over the past year to negotiate one. Yields on its $750 million of notes due in September 2022 rose above 50% for the first time this week. The list includes several other African countries such as Angola, Gabon, Nigeria, and Cameroon. Iraq is the only Middle East nation in the distress zone, though Oman spreads are nearing 1,000 basis points too. Given the collapse in US Treasury yields this year as investors pile into havens, a dollar spread of 1,000 basis points more or less equates to a yield of 10%. That's why I called it the end of halcyon days. These became known as halcyon days when storms do not occur. And I said about Zambia in October and before that to Ronak Gopaldas, but Ozymandias, which you probably know by now because I like it so much, the canary in the coal mine is Zambia. Sub-Saharan Africa, WHO, Dr. Tedros, Africa has to prepare for the worst, he said. It's a short interview on Bloomberg. Have a listen. This is an e-tracking map of the COVID-19 in Africa. Prepare for the worst as the coronavirus begins to spread locally. I think Africa should wake up. My continent should wake up. Khadija Patel, we must flatten the curve now. This is the headline page of the Mail and Guardian in South Africa. I quoted Epsilon theory before, nothing, 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 cluster, cluster, cluster. This is the phase Africa is in. And then boom. Don't be fooled by COVID-19 numbers from countries that do not test. Africa. Not a country, obviously. Total tests per million, not one African country is featuring there. The number of tests we have is very, very disappointing. It's maybe 40 or 50. That's Ethiopia, which is going to be the epicenter. There are only 200 intensive care units in the capital, Addis Ababa. As I said on the 27th of January, I have to assume that the coronavirus is already in Africa, but just not diagnosed. That's a racing certainty. 3rd of February, I said Bole is the epicenter of China-Africa connectedness. 2nd of March, I wrote about the COVID-19 in sub-Saharan Africa, and I said the first issue is whether the coronavirus will infect the continent. At that time, everyone said, no, it won't. It's not coming here. And I said then we know that the coronavirus is exponential, non-linear, and multiplicative, and what exponential disease propagation looks like in the real world. Real world exponential growth looks like nothing, 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 then cluster, 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 then boom. Bill Gates, this disease when it comes to Africa will be more dramatic than in China, and I don't want to play down what is happening in China. Well, it's coming. 24th of February, I said we're past the point of no return. Gladwell's tipping point moment in an epidemic when a virus reaches critical mass. It's the boiling point. It's the moment on the graph when the line starts to shoot straight upwards. TRVRB, we believe that international seeding events started to occur in mid-January. We have a critical 10 weeks from then to late March to contain these nascent outbreaks. So Africa missed the boat there. COVID-19 and SSA and the R word. Politics in the age of COVID. Nigeria and Malawi political parties continue to hold massive rallies. And they're playing with the fact that a virus exhibits non-linear and exponential characteristics. I expressed extreme concerns about coronavirus making landfall in Africa to Radio 702 Bruce Whitfield. I wrote an article in the Africa Report, Debt, Virus and Locusts Create a Perfect Storm for Africa. The virus is not correlated to endogenous market dynamics, but is an exogenous uncertainty that remains unresolved, and therefore it is a black swan. And then I was talking about Nigeria, predictable and predicted that they were going to have to devalue the currency. I was talking about the Eurobond market, how it was going to be shattered, rising debt service ratios, and the fact that the main African countries, in my view, are going to grow at -2% this full year. Nigeria says virus may trigger foreign exchange realignment. They're stating the obvious. Buhari said the country needed to prepare to take tough economic decisions. These lines make me hopeful that they're coming around to considering a devaluation in the near term instead of prevaricating, Yvonne Mahango. Unsubstantiated rumours suggest that President Buhari told the Economic Advisory Council that he doesn't even want to hear anything about the exchange rate. Non-so too. We have less room to manoeuvre this time round, and there is much less optimism. Hold on to your hats. It's bound to be a bumpy ride. I did a podcast with Nicholas Norbrook of the Africa Report when I touched on most of these points. Please have a listen. That link is on Rich Wrap-Ups. Angola unfazed by market havoc. Plans $3 billion Eurobond. Angola, whose dollar bonds are trading at distressed levels following the global risk sell-off, said it's planning to raise as much as $3 billion in a Eurobond sale to help finance a budget deficit expected to widen as the plunge in oil prices cuts government revenue. Yields on 2025 Eurobonds of Africa's biggest oil producers soared 1,649 basis points since the beginning of March to 23.52%, amid plunging crude prices and the spread of the coronavirus. The average spread of Angola's dollar bonds over treasuries is 1,645 basis points, well above the 1,000 that many investors consider to be the threshold for debt to be classed as distressed. It's not credible, full stop, said Kevin Daly. What Angola should be talking about is tapping the IMF emergency funding vehicle and speaking with China in order to close what will be a much larger than expected financing gap, given the collapse in oil prices. It's highly unlikely they can come to the market. They can't come to the market. There's no hope. And this is the point I was saying in Africa Report. It's a perfect storm. Buckle up and let's stop popping the quaaludes. This is a complete example of it. It's ridiculous. South Africa cut 100 basis points from 6.25 to 5.25. The oil shares down 33.5% so far this year. Dollar rand, last time I looked, 17.27. Egyptian pound, 15.75. EGX 30 down 34.06%. Nigerian all share down 17.6%. Ghana Stock Exchange down 3.38%. Kenya destroys fresh roses as virus crashes demand in Europe. Kenya's flower industry, the largest exporter of blooms to Europe, is staring at a disaster if disruptions caused by the coronavirus pandemic continue for just 2 months. Farms are exporting only 20% of the 60 tons of cut flowers that they would normally send daily to markets including the United Kingdom, Netherlands and Germany, according to the Kenya Flower Council Chief Executive Officer Clement Tulezi. The rest are being destroyed, Tulezi said in an interview on Thursday. There is no demand in Europe. Almost the entire market has collapsed. Technically, our industry is on lockdown. Flower industry could be forced to cut wages and trim its workforce of more than 150,000 people. Most of the farms now operating at 20% capacity, and with just half of the workers are dreading the pandemic that has disrupted everything from flights to schools and social life. Flowers. Tea sales flopped. There's going to be no tourism. This is going to be really dramatic, I'm afraid. Diamond Trust reported full year earnings per share up 1.506%. Dividend per share was up 3.846%. Profit before tax up 2.6%. It's trading on a PE ratio of just 3.8. Nairobi all shares down 20.16%, NSE 20 is down 23.43%. I wish you a great weekend.